It was Mrs. Juniper's birthday. She was 80 years old that summer day, and she had planned and saved and dreamed for many a month as to giving herself this birthday treat, nothing more nor less than a trip to London town. It did seem a bit extravagant to spend 15 shillings on a London ticket, and she hoped she was not selfish in paying all that money to a railway company, while the missionaries were telling of open doors that for lack of means they could not enter. Mrs. Juniper felt quite conscience-stricken too, when her pastor Ebenezer pleaded for the whitewashing and cleaning up of the little chapel. And then she remembered the money in the teapot, saved and hoarded from the sweet produce of her little flower garden, from posies sold to visitors or taken to Heathdown Market in great numbers every week. Mrs. Juniper's garden was the pride of little Heathdown folk. Her husband had been a gardener, and somehow her flowers seemed linked with the memories of days long ago among the lilies white and golden, and of the happy days, now but a memory, of their wedded life, when together they gave their spare time to tending the blossoms they loved. But when their only surviving child, a boy, was 5 years old, husband and father had died, and the good wages he received as a private gardener ceased, and it seemed as though the mother must give up her home among the flowers and get her boy into an orphanage, as all the neighbours advised her. Just then she was not strong. Her grief and loss threatened to result in serious illness. How could she work and struggle on alone? Yet somehow the needed strength was given day by day. She took in sewing and mending, and having been a laundry maid ere her marriage, she soon obtained washing from various houses. It was all hard work, and sometimes she went short of rest and even of food, for Hubert was a delicate child and needed all things nourishing as well as nursing. Still, it was recompense that her boy was growing up in that good garden that she could still manage to maintain in the early mornings and when her son was asleep. Then there was time to look after the lavender and the honeysuckle and the clustering roses and the velvety dusky pansies and the sweet lilies that were noted for their beauty and their fragrance all around, and that ever seemed to be whispering, "He who remembers the lilies will ever be mindful of his own." What with washing, sewing, flower growing, faring hard, paying hard and loving much, Mrs. Juniper kept on her cottage of remembrance and reared her boy to strength and good looks that caused her self-abasement, because, in pride of heart, she contrasted him every Sunday with all the other boys in the Sunday school, and pitied poor Mrs. Jones and Mrs. Smith for having such ordinary-looking children, while her own was so remarkably handsome. And not only in looks did her Bertie excel, but he was the sharpest lad in Little Heathdown. He was always the one chosen at the Sunday school anniversary to read the chapter in public, or to recite some special piece. He was the soloist too in the special melodies, for his voice was sweet as a bird's. Prizes and medals and general approbation at the weekday school likewise became his accustomed experience. No one was surprised when a gentleman, a friend of the squire's, interested in that school, chose Hubert Juniper as the one whom he wanted educated at Heathdown Grammar School, when he might possibly pass to one of the universities. This gentleman paid the grammar school fees, but it did not occur to him that Hubert's association with boys better off meant more expense for the mother. Mrs. Juniper had to find better suits, money for books the boy said he needed, good boots for the long walks, and countless little expenses for various funds to which the schoolboys subscribed. So the mother worked harder, and the boy grew more clever and better pleased with himself every day. There was one cloud over his life just then, that someone at the school had reported his mother took in washing. Of this fact Hubert had become extremely ashamed, and he took great pains to conceal it. He often informed his mother that he meant to make his fortune, and that she would then be clothed in silks, and drive about in a carriage like the squire's, only much grander, and of course she would leave the cottage and be waited on by footmen, like those at the Hall, only much taller. Poor Hubert! His intentions were kind, but self was the object of the clever lad's chief regard. He won the college scholarship, and had to be provided with suitable things during his Oxford career. Many a night his mother sat up to make his shirts and knit his socks. Now he was married and living in London and making his fortune, Heathdown people had heard, but he only wrote home at long intervals and had not seen his mother for 5 years. "My son is that busy," Mrs. Juniper would say to the neighbours. "London is not like Little Heathdown. Why, dear me, my son is that thought of in London town, and so sought after, a postcard now and then just to say he and his are keeping well. That is as much as I can expect, and it's thankful I am he keeps his health in all that London fog." "It would do him good to come down here and get some fresh air sometimes," said the minister's wife, who was given to speaking her mind. "I should think after all you have done and denied yourself for him, his heart must turn to you and the old home and sweet garden sometimes. At any rate, it ought to." "Oh yes," said his mother eagerly. "He had his own little bit of garden yonder. Those lilies by the gate were his own. Oh, I am sure he often thinks of his old mother. Only my Bertie is so sought after in London town that he cannot get time to travel so far. He will come soon, I am sure he will." And she tried not to betray her secret heartache and disappointment. "Well now, come to think of that," confided Mrs. Juniper to her flowers, "I've been to the railway company and arranged a cheap excursion to London, and on my birthday too, to hear some brass bands playing at the Crystal Palace. Ah, but I'm going to have a better treat than brass bands. I'm going to hear the music of my Bertie's voice, and to see the pretty lady, wife he's married, and to nurse his wee lassie, bless her sweet face. 'Twill be like looking on my own little daughter, my own wee lamb that is safe with the tender Lord. He spared to me my Bertie to grow up to be a fine, tall, clever man. If only I knew for certain my Bertie had decided for his mother and father's God, I feel as if I could depart in peace. But he only says as our beliefs down at Little Heathdown are behind the times, whatever that may mean. But I know his father's prayers and mine for him have reached the throne of God, and he can't ever forget the sweet messages he used to hear and read and learn when he was a little lad at home, any more than he can ever forget the sweet lilies round about our gate, and how their scent fills all the lane and comes in at the chapel window when we're at the meeting. I must take him a big bunch of lilies when I go to London town, and now I need only spend 5 shillings. That's 10 to divide between the missionaries and the cleaning up of Ebenezer Chapel, but I'll put it in the box in the lobby, anonymous writing on a bit of paper what my half-sovereign is for. 'Tis you have earned it, my bonny lilies, and I'm not going to be boastful about what I subscribe. The dear master said the left hand isn't to know what the right hand gives." And the half-sovereign went into the box for thank-offering, apportioned equally to missions and to Ebenezer. And Mrs. Juniper, clad in her best and bearing a huge cake and a basket of white lilies, set out on her 60th birthday for the first time in her life to visit the great metropolis, leaving at home the watch that had descended to her from an aunt, in good service as a housekeeper, for her opinion of the great city peopled it with robbers. Her big old tabby cat Rebecca she carried to her neighbour, and then took her departure, much elated at the thought that ere evening she would take Bertie by surprise and hold his baby girl in her arms. Arriving in London, a kindly policeman put her on the right omnibus for the neighbourhood she wanted. She did not stay for any refreshment, as she knew there would be plenty in the grand big house wherein she loved to picture her son. As to her daughter-in-law, all she knew about her was that Bertie had met her at the house of some grand college friend, that she was a lady born and had some titled relations, and that she and Bertie were quite gentlefolks and lived in a fashionable part of London. Mrs. Juniper had been just a little hurt that her son's wife had never sent her a portrait of herself, or replied to the letter that with difficulty, ill-spent and ill-worded she knew, she had written to her on learning of her engagement, but she told herself ladies born would not understand how her heart in life's autumn tide was feeling a little lonely, and how precious a few kindly words from her son's wife would have been. The omnibus put her down near the square where Mr. Juniper, Jocelyn as Hubert now called himself, resided. Hubert's first educational friend had passed away, but the lad had grown up handsome and attractive, a favourite at college and socially much in request, his fine voice developing into a sweet tenor. He made friends wherever he went, and finally became the son-in-law of a well-to-do and well-connected financier, who ere his death had initiated Hubert into the mysteries of company promoting, out of which Hubert's natural sharpness was now making what people called a very good thing. Money had increased, he was popular and of importance, yet in his dreams often and often his heart went back to the flower-twined cottage of peace, and to the hymns he was wont to sing in that fair old country village. Poor Mrs. Juniper went round and round the square, but could not find her son's house. She had grown too bewildered to give the right number, and she was beginning to fear her memory was failing, and that she would never reach the shelter of her Bertie's dwelling and hear his words of welcome, when suddenly a motor car came swiftly along, just as she stepped off the pavement to try and read the name of the road on a lamp-post, and she was nearly under it, and the one occupant pulled it up sharply with an angry remark that old women were always getting in the way. Then the scent of white lilies smote him with a shock, and pulling the car up to the curb he jumped out with the cry, "Mother!" Surely, surely it cannot be you." "Indeed, and it is, my Bertie. Praise be to heaven I have found you. For your number I've been and mislaid, and I can't this moment call it to mind. But how grand you look, my sonny. Gold chain and all, and a beautiful coat like the squire's, and driving about like the lightning, nearly knocking old folks down that are slow on their legs like me, now they're not so young as they once were. My Bertie, you're quite the gentleman. It do feel good to look on your face again, my own dear lad. And where do you go to chapel now, dear Bertie? I've often wondered which of the great London ministers you listen to." Hubert could have told her his Sundays were more about the golf links than about any ministers or services, but his one concern just then was to get her further off, for his house was just round the corner, and a titled lady, his wife's great aunt, was coming to dinner that evening, and it was perfectly impossible that his mother could go to his house. "Just fancy you coming to London," he said. "Well, I must take you somewhere and get you something to eat, and then I can take you on to the station. What time does the excursion return?" "It is a 1-day or an 8-day trip, Hubert. I thought I should not have time to see much of you if I went back today, so I put the cat with Mrs. Marsh and locked up." "Oh, I'm very sorry, Mother," he said nervously, "but the fact is I am particularly busy and Muriel is not very strong, and I should not like to startle her. I have never happened to mention to you about my wife, so it would be quite a shock to her if you went there. You see, her people are rather high up in society, and I should not like them to look down on me or you either, so I did not happen to mention that I had any relations." "Do you mean," asked Mrs. Juniper, "that your wife does not know you have a mother? Why, I wrote to her when I heard you were going to marry. Did she not have the letter?" "No," he stammered, colouring beneath the pained look of those patient eyes. "Her people make such fun of things, and I did not want you laughed at. I did not give her the letter." The London air seemed to make Mrs. Juniper dazed and faint. "I will go home," she said in a bewildered way. "You do not want me any more, my son. I will go home to my garden. My garden needs me still. Will you take the lilies? Even grand ladies are fond of flowers." "You must not take it like that, Mother," he said awkwardly. "You see, things are so different with me now. Even my name is different. I took my father-in-law's name under his will in inheriting some of his property. The world I move in now would not understand you, and you would not feel at home with us, I fear." "I should like to have held your little child," she said. "But I will be going, Bertie. Your old mother will not be a drawback to you, or stand in your light, now the great folks have taken you up. But oh, my son, my own boy, remember the things of this life never really satisfy the soul, for that is immortal. Your heart will not rest till you come to the Lord and Saviour whom you have trusted, whose love changes not though riches fly away, and the fashion of this world passes. You may well be ashamed of an old-fashioned body like your poor old mother, Bertie, but I entreat you do not be ashamed of my Master, and my Lord who gave his life to save you from the destroyer, and who is seeking you still. I know it, though you are turning away from listening to his call. Oh, my own boy, you will live to see many, many changes, but he is the one who changes not. May he give you rest, for the world never, never can." Hubert felt uncomfortable lest any who knew him should hear this grey-haired countrywoman in this plain black dress and grey shawl and cotton gloves, with her burden of cake peeping out from its wrappings, address him as "my son." More than one glanced at the pair with interest, the good-looking man in frock coat and silk hat, and a hothouse flower adorning his buttonhole, and the elderly old body fresh from the country. She was evidently some old servant of his, they thought, probably his nurse. But her voice, in its exhortation, was growing too loud and clear for his peace of mind. He pressed lunch upon her at some restaurant and advised her to walk on down the square while he took the car back, his driver being unwell that day, and he would join her and see her off by the return excursion. "No, my son," she said gently. "Take the lilies into your lady wife. You need not tell without you choose that they come with a mother's love and prayers and blessings. I will go back by the omnibus and get a drink of milk at some plain shop where folks like me don't feel out of place. And the cake, you will not take it, shall be for the Lord's poor. Then I will go and sit at the station and watch the trains. 'Tis wonderfully entertaining. And you used to beg to be taken to Heathdown station. Do you remember, Bertie, to see the puff-puffs when you were a little boy? Dear me, it seems but yesterday. It won't be long before the excursion goes back. It gets to Heathdown at 1 in the morning, but there's sure to be someone driving into our village. Goodbye, my Bertie, my dear son. The shepherd of the fold find you, my dearly loved, and make you his own, and be to you more precious than all this world can give or take away. And if ever you are weary of the show and the bustle and the money-making, my lad, come back to rest among the sweet flowers in the old home, and your old mother will have a welcome for her boy as long as she is spared on earth, and please God, one day at the beautiful gate. It was past 1 o'clock in the morning when the return excursion steamed into Heathdown, and no conveyance was going her way. The old lady, for somehow she felt suddenly grown old and feeble and faltering, crept slowly between the hedges gemmed with night dew, till the breath of the lilies whispering on the winds told her she was near home at last, and the white sweet clusters shone like silver in the moonlight. Mrs. Juniper fumbled in her pocket for the key, and crept into the moonlit shadows of the kitchen. Rebecca, who had made her way back from the neighbours and entered through a window, rose from the hearthrug and rubbed against her dress in joyful welcome. That touch of affection seemed to loosen the tension of the heartache and disappointment. The widow hid her face in her hands, and the tears that flowed from them in the moonlight quietude were waters of healing and relief, for the weeping was at the feet of him who is acquainted with grief, and who still understands and cares when the heart is overburdened and oppressed. The mother passed the still early hours of the morning in pleading for her son at the throne of grace. To her the show and the prosperity meant but little if her boy were forgetting the Lord whom his father loved and served. She pleaded that he might know and possess the one thing needful, fellowship with the Master, the blessing of the heavenly grace. And the breath of the lilies seemed to say, "Be not afraid, be not consumed with anxious care. Consider how our life is kept by power divine. He who careth for the lilies will not forget his children. Wait on the Lord who giveth the flowers, the sunshine, the rain from heaven. Wait on the Lord, wait patiently for him." The neighbours were surprised to see Mrs. Juniper back so soon. The minister's wife called in to hear about her visit to London, but, talkative lady though she was, the sight of the lined, quiet face that seemed somehow to have aged silenced the questions on her lips, and she began to talk about the renovation of Ebenezer Chapel and how the people were giving willingly, and there was money enough to renovate the schoolroom as well, and Mrs. Juniper must come to the church meeting and hear how bright and clean it was proposed to make the place. I ought to have been faithful with her, she told herself, going home down the land, and told her she had made her son an idol, and disappointment was her punishment. But her look was so gentle, so patient. The thought came to me, there is one who understands a mother's heart better than any on earth can do. I cannot help feeling he is going to answer her prayers, and to satisfy her heart, if not on earth, then certainly yonder in the homeland. 3 years sped by, and the widow still kept the little cottage home by means of the garden, for she was no longer strong enough for the washing. Hubert had written to her at long intervals, saying that when he was less busy he meant to come down and make some arrangement for her benefit, perhaps buy her an annuity, or try to purchase the cottage, but she had never seen him since their meeting in London, and the last letter, some months ago, had spoken of money losses, business perplexities, the failure of mines with which he was connected. As things were at present, he had said he must be careful in parting with money, and could not see his way just now to the help he would like to give. Mrs. Juniper had answered that she was doing very well with her flowers and honey, and she was keeping her health and able to work, praise the Lord, and she told him that never a day went by without her prayer arising for him and his, and that whenever he came to his mother's, a great welcome awaited him. Again it was summer, and the flowers appeared again on the earth. The singing of birds filled the grassy glades, and in the widow's fair garden all things seemed to tell of the eternal goodness, and with voiceless lips to utter forth his praise. "My dear, can you take in a lodger, leastways a couple? A lady and her little girl?" "A lodger? It's a long time," said Mrs. Juniper, "since I had a lodger. There's the 2 rooms, of course, for bedroom and parlour, but I don't know that I could make them comfortable, unless they are plain folk that would put up with an old body like me to look after them." "Old? You're not old? My mother is nearly 100, and I hope you will be too," said good Mrs. Giles from the Down farm. She and her husband were Ebenezer people, and had been good friends of the widow for many a year. "It is like this," she added. "The lady saw our advertisement in the railway guide, and she came down all of a hurry without writing to us, for her little daughter has been ailing, and the doctor said she must have country of air and plenty of cream and eggs and milk. He said the doctor we named as our reference was well known to him, and this air would be just right for the child. So away she came, and a sweet little lady she is too, with a voice like music, and such a winning way with her. But she looks a bit sad too. for her husband is in foreign parts just now, and the child has been taken ill in his absence. You see, we're quite full up, with a big family come to our rooms for the holidays, and she was so disappointed I said I would come across and see if I could get her accommodated here. The little girl would love this cottage. She's rare fond of flowers, her mother says, and your garden is just a picture this summer. Well, well, said Mrs. Juniper, the little child will be welcome as the flowers in May. 'Twill be music to hear little feet pattering about the floor. What do you think of that, Rebecca? You and me is to have company this summer. We must get things a bit trim before the lady comes in, so go out in the sunshine and wash your face, and I'll clean the place and put up fresh curtains. It's like a new pin now, said the farmer's wife, as the widow drew from a chest the clean curtains smelling of lavender. And she is like a picture herself, thought the good lady, looking back at the sweet calm face in the doorway, framed by dewy bunches of climbing roses. That afternoon the visitor from London arrived. Mrs. Juniper's heart went out to her directly, despite the fashionable gait. She looked so girlish, so lonely, so anxious concerning the white-faced, brown-eyed mite that had lately been so ill with bronchitis. Myrtle's nurse had left suddenly to get married, and the child had missed her experienced care. "Till I get another," said the mother. "Baby puts up with me, but nurse has been used to sick children and could make all kinds of things to get baby to eat." "But nurse couldn't sing to me, mummy, like you do," said the little one, resting her head against the fashionable dress. "Baby is so fond of singing," the young mother explained. "I always sing her to sleep. Just now she is very wakeful." "So you do not get much sleep yourself, my dear, I'm afraid," said Mrs. Juniper, forgetting her awe of the grandeur as the violet eyes looked at her so appealingly. "But the little lamb will get well and strong in this sweet air, and she must get some of my red roses in her dear little face, bless her." Little Myrtle was soon cuddled up in the motherly arms and carried about to see the lilies and the pansies, and her little heart was filled with delight. When she went to bed, the young mother, worn out with travelling, had dropped off to sleep in the old easy-chair. So Mrs. Juniper sang to Myrtle that night, and it was a hymn concerning the children's Lord. When Mrs. Juniper came downstairs, her lodger, who had chosen to rest in the kitchen armchair rather than the parlour, was just waking up, and she said wonderingly, "I thought I was dreaming, and that my mother was singing me to sleep. Were you singing? I have not heard that hymn, ever since I was a tiny little girl. My mother died when I was 5, but I have missed her all my life. There is no one like a mother, and mine was so good, so sweet. I can remember her praying by my little bed. I should have been different altogether if my mother had only lived." "The dear Master to whom she prayed makes us different, my dearie," said the other, taking the delicate ringed hand into her wrinkled one. "Where we are wrong he sets us right. You cannot speak to your mother here below, though by the Master's grace you will meet her in the glory land. But you can still speak to her Lord and Saviour, and ask him to take you just as you are, whatever the burden on your poor soul, and make you whiter than snow, purer than the lilies. Dear heart, you are tired of all this world offers. You have not found rest, nor will you except in the Lord Jesus Christ. Your part is to come to him, poor child, and no one ever came in vain. He is the rest of every weary and contrite heart. He has never cast out a seeking soul, and he will not cast you out." For many and many a day that young heart, turning from the maze of fashion and social display, had been longing and thirsting for something better and beyond, longing for the name that is above every name, yet finding no help, no light, no comfort in the fashionable services she occasionally attended. The old marked Bible that had been her mother's she had found in a long-forgotten box, and this she had read in secret, dreading lest her husband should be amused and make light concerning these hidden longings of her heart. "I think God has brought me here," she said with a sigh of content. "When the doctor said Myrtle must go into the country at once, I knelt down and asked him to show me where to go. And I was so bewildered. And here in this sweet place I feel at home. I seem somehow to have known you all my life. Let me stay with you till my husband returns. You will pray for me, won't you? You will tell me about the peace you know, and about the Lord who seems to you so near, so real, just like a helper and a friend." "My dearie, I have known him this 80 years. I have loved him as long as I can remember. I can't say good enough for my Master. No one can even think good enough of his tender mercy and his love. I bear witness that not one cry that ever goes up to him does he refuse or forget. But my dear, what are you looking at over yonder? That's a very old photograph of my boy, my only son when he was at school. My Hubert's different to that now, but he was always well-looking. He's well-to-do now and mixes with gentlefolks. But, stammered the other, I have a portrait like that of my husband in his boyhood. My husband's name is Hubert, but I never heard his mother was living. It is not possible. It cannot be. But, oh, if only you were really my mother. Dear heart, said the old lady amid her tears, as the young wife put her arms round her neck. Praise the Lord. He has brought my son's wife and the little lamb home to the old nest. Yes, dearie, I see now why the wee lassie's eyes minded me of my boy. You are my own dear daughter, and whatever a mother can do to help you, I will do, and bless the Lord that I hold you in my arms. I cannot understand, said Hubert's wife, why Hubert never told me about you and this sweet cottage and this lovely village. All these years I might have had a mother, and he never told me. He often said he was a self-made man, but I thought he only meant he started without capital. Oh, he ought to have told me. My dear, you being related to high folks, I think my poor lad was a bit nervous to tell you he had a mother earned her living and who once took in washing, though I have had to give that up now and just look after the flowers. You see, my Bertie was always one to ask, what would people say or think of him? And he's that fond of you, he might have been afraid of losing your affection, though I think there he made a mistake. For her womanly intuition discerned a firmness about the sweet lips of the young wife that even Hubert had not realised. Lose my affection? As though my affection depended on grand ancestors. I have plenty of such. I would rather have you, mother, she said half timidly. If Hubert had only known how I longed for a mother. The word was like music to the old lady's ears. Surely never was heart happier than her own as they sat hand in hand, and she hears the life story of the motherless girl, and how, amid a whirl of pleasure, the young heart had been craving for a better, purer, more useful and more restful life. In these calm summer days among the lilies, they read together in the old book of the Redeemer. They spoke of him who is mighty to save. The young wife was naturally shy, and the minister's wife, when she called, thought her at first rather reserved, rather high and mighty, as she expressed it to her husband, but she soon grew to understand that what she mistook for pride was timidity. To Granny, however, the young heart opened, as a flower to the sunshine. The life in the sweet calm of autumn tide had treasures of holy experience wherewith to help the heart just starting trustfully, joyfully in the Christian life, and Muriel said again and again, I will be like Ruth, mother, I never mean to leave you. Baby cannot do without Rebecca or without this garden, and I cannot do without my mother. But the old lady shook her head, smiling amidst the tears of thanksgiving. Their place was in London town, she said, though among the lilies the home welcome would be theirs, so long as God spared her here below. In London it was evening, but not dark enough yet for what was in the mind of a broken-hearted, ruined man. His journey abroad had revealed to him what he feared, that his means were gone, and the creditors would take all save an annuity settled upon his wife, only a small one, for her father had believed the husband knew how to multiply and increase all the capital he could deal with. A vast amount of capital Hubert had dealt with. Where was the money now? The riches had taken wings and flown away. Speculations, prosperous at first, had become disastrous. He was back in England with nothing, save what was his creditors. He could not, would not go home and tell his wife, accustomed to every luxury, that they were beggared. He could no longer show himself in society. Nobody would want his acquaintance now he was poor. No, the solution of this trouble was in the darkly flowing river. He would wait till the shadows of midnight fell, and then he would end everything rather than face all the difficulties and losses and troubles. Just then, at the sunset hour, a little bright-faced lad came by with his mother. They were bound for a flower service in a London chapel, and they had bought at a florist's a great posy of lilies that by and by would brighten a home of mourning. The breath of the lilies came with a rush of memories to the shrinking man leaning over the river parapet. He could see himself again, a little lad, bearing the silver lilies to the flower service on Sunday afternoon at the old chapel, down in the country lane. With the whisper of the lilies came the remembrance of her who tended them, and of the mother love that would never tire, never reproach, never fail. Was there not a love eternal, beyond a mother's remembering, even though a mother should forget? Had the Lord, to whom had arisen his childhood's prayers, cast him away because no longer his pockets were full? Had the friend who is unchanging abandoned him, ceased to look for the wandering sheep, ceased to call through the gathering shadows? Come, ye weary, I will give you rest. That night, alone beneath the stars, within sound of the waters wherein he had thought to bury his troubles, Hubert saw himself as he really was, poor and needy, sinful, helpless, self-seeking, vain, with nothing to bring the Lord who still so gently bade him come. A spiritual battle was fought out through the powers of night. Pride was conquered, and like the prodigal of old, he who had wasted his powers in seeking and getting gold, making haste to be rich, said in his heart, I will arise and go back to the old home. He felt as if, man as he was, his mother's comfort would strengthen him to break the bad news to his young wife. He knew his mother would open him her door, her heart, her full forgiveness. Would he whose love is beyond all others, passing even a mother's love? A few hours later, when the evening dew was on the lilies, one weary, sad, ashamed, yet more blessed in his contrition than in the hour of his importance, came up the lane that led past Ebenezer Chapel, and went slowly down the lily path and up to the cottage porch. His mother was in the armchair knitting, Rebecca at her feet. She looked so calm, so peaceful sitting there in the sunset glow. But oh, the light upon her face when she looked up and saw, after so many years, her son within the home of his childhood again. Before she could speak, he was kneeling at her side and craving forgiveness for his neglect of her, his thanklessness to her, his life of self-seeking and worldly ambition. The Lord has forgiven me, mother, he faltered. I prayed to him in the starlight by the river last night, and I know he spoke forgiveness. He will help me to live, not for myself, but for him, for others. He has heard your prayers for me, mother. Say you forgive me too. My own boy, she murmured, amid her happy tears. Blessed be his name. He has not turned away my prayers, nor his mercy from me. He is the God that heareth every prayer. None shall call on his name in vain. She would have risen, got him food, and to tell his wife who had gone upstairs to settle her little one for the night, but she saw he wanted to unburden his mind to her, and soon the whole story was poured out. How the money was gone, and he had to begin his life afresh, and he knew not how to tell his wife, used to plenty all her days, that they had no place henceforth, and the wealthy circle of people they had called their friends would be their friends no more. And while he was telling her that his chief sorrow was on account of his wife and child, Muriel was in his arms, for she had overheard his words, and she had no thought save to cheer and comfort and help him. Nor did she, save by one gentle remark, reproach him for concealing that his mother lived and earned her living here among the flowers. While you were away, she said, I found my mother. Oh, Hubert, if you had only known how I have longed for a mother all my life. God guided me here, and oh, I feel so rich, so happy now. Let us seek his blessing, his light, Hubert. We can never be really poor or ruined then. Now, dear mother, I will be like Ruth after all, for you will let us stay here, won't you, and teach me how to tend the flowers. It was as the young wife said. Out of the wrecked fortune, there remained enough to buy the little home, to which other rooms were added gradually as the years went by. Myrtle grew up, a flower lover, to take care of these choice lilies and of the glasshouses that sprang up later on. A former master of Heathdown Grammar School edited the county paper now at Heathdown, and with him Hubert found useful and ever-increasing work. As long as it was necessary, Muriel taught daily at the manor house, but temporal matters righted themselves steadily, for faith, prayer and perseverance accomplish wonders, and he who gave the manna and clothes the lilies is still Jehovah, Jireh, and provides for his children's needs. The minister's wife was ripening in the sunshine of his grace with increasing years. She said nothing to the aging saint about making idols of those she loved, but she used to watch old Mrs. Juniper's face at Ebenezer when Hubert prayed or took the services, as he was often asked to do in the pastor's absence, for he was used of God to the help and comfort of many, or when Muriel found the places for her in the Bible or hymn book, and Myrtle in the choir took the solo in some echoing hymn of praise. She looks like a doxology, thought the minister's wife. Sitting there with her dear ones, in the midst of those who loved her, Mrs. Juniper's heart made music like the message of the flowers. Fear not, only believe. The Lord is mindful of his own.